Hey, this is Mikey with another After Effects tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about Skybox by Mettle, 360 VR stuff for YouTube, and how to do all sorts of things like watermarks, object removal, color correction, compositing, adding effects, and also what doesn't work when you're working with 360-degree video. So I want this video to be basically a bunch of techniques that you can use when you're working with 360-degree video, and I'm going to be using Skybox, the Skybox Studio suite, and it's really kind of a necessary when you want to do certain things. Certain things you can't even do unless you have some sort of software to be able to interpret the footage. So what I have here is the final product, and this is what we're going to be making. We're going to be doing some color correcting. I composited some new background footage, see through the doors. I added a lens flare, and there's a certain way you have to do that as well, and some good glow effects and color correction, and it really kind of makes a cool look. This is what we started with, is this right here. Let's look in the preview of it. You can see the colors aren't exactly where they need to be, and all the windows are blown out and things like that. I want to say a special thank you to Jamie Hall, who provided the footage for this tutorial, and I've got some of these clips available for download. You can't use them commercially. There's a watermark on them as well, but make sure you can go check out his website, filmjamie.com. He's a very talented director of photography, and it has some really great stuff. So go check out his website. So let's take this and let's convert it. Again, I'm using Skybox Studio. It's made by Mettle. And what Skybox Studio is it's a set of plugins and scripts that you're able to work with 360 video. So most video, when you get it, is going to look like this. If you're getting 360 video, if you're creating it from, say, a rig of 6 different GoPros, it's going to be in this equirectangular view, just like this. So if you wanted to do things to this, it gets a little bit difficult. So you wanted to add some text in here, like a watermark or something like that. You just can't easily do that. So for instance, see there at the bottom, there's a black all the way across. And what that is you can see the tripod. There's a sandbag holding up the tripod with the camera on it, and it's right there. And if I wanted to get rid of that, well, trying to edit this footage right here is just not going to work. So let's start with a brand new composition. I've got 2 clips in here. I'm going to just drag and drop on. This is the scene 1. And what I want to use is the extractor from Skybox, and that is a script. So I've already got it installed. Go down to scripts and Skybox Extractor. And what the extractor does is it's going to, well, let me just show you real quick. So it says this is the scene right there. That's the comp we're using. Extract Skybox and check if I am using 3D plugins. And if you're not, you can uncheck that, and it makes things a little bit easier. But just in case that I want to, I'm going to keep that checked and hit extract. Now I'm going to go in and close down all of these other compositions. Okay, so what we have, I'm going to keep this up here, just down at the bottom because I might come back to it. This first composition is your main footage. The second one is the output. So after you add all your edits to it, this is the one that you want to export if you're going to bring it onto YouTube or whatever service you're using to view 360 video. And then here is your edit layer. There's one more. If we come in here, up in the project window, there's also this preview. Double click that and open that up. And what the preview does is you can basically preview what it's going to be like on YouTube. Just using the camera tools to rotate around. So first thing let's do is talk about how to add a watermark to this. So if I say want to add a watermark to it, let's grab some text, make that nice and big, stick it right there. Well, let's go over to the preview, and that watermark should show up. But you can see it's curvy. So if we wanted that to look straight, then we need to add an effect to it. So let's go back over to our input, and let's add one of the Mettle Skybox effects. So if we go to Effect, down to Mettle, and then we have the Skybox Converter. And first off, it's going to set your input and output to equirectangular. And what we need to do is set the input to 2D source and the output to equirectangular. And then what we can do is we can move things around in this reorient camera. So you can see there, it's already looking different. So let's put this right where we want. So maybe we do want it right there, right where we had it. And if we go back into the preview, you can see now that text looks straight and flat. It's not curved like it was before. So that's just adding a simple watermark to something. Let's talk about object removal, because as I look down, you can see, you can't really see the tripod itself, but you can see the sandbags that are holding up the tripod. Or maybe it was a light stand or something. I'm not sure what they used to hold it up, but you can see the sandbags down there, and I want to remove that. So let's go into the edit layer. And as I look down, what the edit layer is, if we switch to, say, a custom view, you can see it's a cube. And we've got all these different faces of the cube. And these are all based off of a composition. If we double click on that, that looks like this. So it's a cube map version of it. And the cube map version is an easy way to do things like object removal because it's relatively flat. So I'm going to take this layer. I need to unlock it first. And I need to pre-compose it so that I compose the Skybox effect into the layer. So I'm going to Command-Shift-C, pre-compose, make sure I move all the attributes. And then from this point, I'm going to duplicate it because I want to get rid of that sandbag. So let's take the pen tool and mask around the sandbag. And then hit Y on your keyboard, and it's your pan behind tool. But when you pan behind with a mask and a composition, it'll actually move your composition within the mask. And I might need to rotate this just a little bit to line up the lines. And let's feather that mask. So right off the bat, it's looking pretty good. I am going to go in and let's color correct this, just the brightness contrast, and make it a little bit darker. Just so it blends in. Looking good. Now if we go over back to the preview, let's go back to the edit. One thing that you need to know is whatever you do in the edit room, as far as where the camera is, it affects everything else. So I like to make sure I go back and reset the orientation on the camera in the edit room to 0. That way when you're in the preview, everything works good. So you can see in the preview that sandbag is now gone. And that's just some simple object removal. Let's talk about color correction. When you're working with 360 video, you can really color correct pretty much the same way that you do any video. And most of the effects work the same way, except for things like sharpening and blurs. That's going to give you some troubles. So for example, let's actually take off that watermark. If I want to color correct this this footage right here, let's go to Effects, Color Correction, add the curves. Say it's to blue, so let's drop the blue and drop a little green. Maybe increase the contrast. Something like that. Well, that's going to work just fine when we go over into the preview. Because what I'm doing is I am editing that layer flat all the way across. So as long as I'm not adding a gradient to this that's kind of at an angle or something like that, you need whatever you apply to it to be even all the way across the whole image. Now, one thing that doesn't work when you edit this way is, say I thought this was a little bit too blurry and I wanted to try to sharpen it up a little bit. So if we go to Effects, Blur and Sharpen, let's just add the Sharpen effect to it and bring that up. Let's say it was really blurry, and so we put it up to 200 or 150, and that's still looking pretty good on my monitor here. Let's go over to the preview, and what we're going to see is, yeah, everything looks kind of sharp, but see that line right there in the middle? That line is because we go back over to this, and let's turn on and off the sharpening. You can see the sharpening creates kind of a line right on the edge. You see there's a little bit of a brightness that kind of brightens up the edge because it sharpens the edge that way. And so there's a little brightness right there, and a little brightness on the other side, and then we go over to the preview. That's where they connect and meet together, and so there's going to be a line there. So not all effects work the same. So let's try another effect. Let's go in and say we wanted to blur it. So let's do a fast blur, and maybe we just blur just horizontally, right? First off, I notice, oh, I better do the repeat pixel edges, right? Or you're going to have a line there. So we do that. Looking pretty good. Let's go over to the preview. Well, it's not looking good. You can see it didn't blur right, even though it looks like the whole room is kind of spinning. That's a really kind of a cool looking blur, but it didn't line up on the edges because it's not blurring into itself like it should be if it was a 360. You have to look at this footage as if it's almost like a cylinder, or, you know, so this edge meets up with this edge. So let's take that off. But what I do want to do is I want to composite on a new background. So you saw in the example, we had a new background scene. So what I have here is another 360 video showing outside. And so I want this to be the outside of the windows, because you can see there it's just kind of a little bit too bright. I want to be able to see something. So what I'm going to do is, I could try like a Luma key or an extract filter, but I think it's going to give me troubles with so much lightness in here, you know, right down here. And so in a situation like this where I have very specific white spots that I want to key out, and there's very specific white spots like right here where the light is shining that I don't want to key out, but there's a good border in between them, the best way to do it is using like a magic wand in Photoshop, but there's not a magic wand in After Effects, unless you know about the paint bucket effect. So if we use a paint bucket, and what paint bucket does is there's a point, right? And at that point it'll fill until it reaches edges, and it's based off of threshold and tolerance and things like that. Right now it's set to a color, but I can switch the blending mode from normal to stencil alpha, and then click this invert fill, and it's basically like a magic wand. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to bring this all the way over to this window over here on the side. Let's maybe adjust the tolerance a little bit. And then I'm going to duplicate and then move the target. Duplicate, move the target. I'm just hitting Command D on the keyboard to duplicate. And it's going to end up creating a bunch of these paint buckets, but there's a lot of different windows I need to key out. So on a situation like this, I can come in and adjust the tolerance, or I can come in with a mask and mask over that beam, and then go into the effects down in the timeline on that last layer I just did, because that's the one we're doing. On compositing options, I'm going to hit plus, and it's going to grab the mask, and then I'm going to go to the mask, and instead of subtract or add, I'm going to subtract, and it's going to be able to keep that beam in there if it was just a little bit too tight. Okay, let's do the next one. Okay, so just quickly, you see how I was able to go in and key out all those windows. And right here where there's white from the light on the floor, that's not being keyed out, which would have happened if I used a Luma key. I did end up with a bunch of paint bucket effects, but that's okay. Now if I wanted to soften that edge a little bit, go to Effect, Blur, and go to Channel Blur, and let's just blur the alpha a little bit. Maybe only 3 will all we need to do. Okay. Now what we have here is a background, and I actually don't like where that background is. I want to rotate the whole environment. And what we can do is, well, I could maybe move this, but then I'm going to have to duplicate it and move it over there. But Skybox, with the Skybox converter, I can reorient the camera. So even though I'm inputting equirectangular and outputting the same thing, it allows me to reorient the camera. You see how the background is moving? I can even make the whole thing crooked. But I just want to rotate the whole thing left and right until I've got a background that I like. I want to see a little bit more sky. Okay. I like that bridge right there. Some little other building things right there. Okay. Now let's go ahead and color correct the background. Even though I do want it to be visible, I also want it to be a lot brighter. So let's crank that up. Maybe bring the blacks way up just so it's kind of washed out. All right, now let's add to this a lens flare. See, it's really bright right here in this window, and we've got, you know, some light spilling in. I want to add a lens flare, and I can't just add a lens flare like you would normally do it. You got to be tricky about it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new black solid, make it the same size as this footage right here, which is really quite big. Let's apply the lens flare to the black solid. And I'm going to put it about like right here. I don't want any of the elements to touch the edges. Now let's go to Mettle and do the Skybox converter. And let's do from the 2D source to the equirectangular. And then as we change the camera and reorient, you can see that's going to solve the problem we had. Let's go in and set this to add. And I'm going to just reorient the camera to create that lens flare. Let's add to this a new adjustment layer. Go down to Stylize and Glow, and I actually want this below the black solid. Let's increase the radius. Bring the threshold or the intensity down. So I just want a nice glow coming out of the windows. And then let's do an overall color correction on this adjustment layer as well. I think the whole inside needs to be a little bit darker. Maybe pull some of the red out. Okay, looking pretty good. Let's go back over to the preview. Now, if we like the way this looks, then this can be ready to export. And what we would do is we would export the output. Now, say I want to add to this some 3D elements. Say something from Element 3D. And how that works is you go into the edit layer. So let's add something. So I'm going to hit Command Y, bring up a new black solid. Say element on it. I'm going to bring on my element plugin. And let's just put in something. Just like a sphere. And let's make it chrome and do a reflection. Now, when I first placed this in here, I'm right in the center of it because the camera is right in the center of this edit layer. So let's go into group 1, the particle replicator, and let's move that to where it needs to be. Now, if we wanted to add to this a reflection map, then what we can do is go into the project settings and get this output layer. I'm going to drag it and drop it on. Let's hide that, and that's going to be our new reflections layer. So let's go to the element controls, go to custom layers. Under the texture map, let's grab that first layer, that's the output, and we can turn that into the environment map. Click on environment map inside of the editor. I'm going to grab that custom layer 1. And look how cool that's looking. Now, let's make sure that we have everything in the right spot. So come down into render settings under physical environment, and let's show in background. And everything is actually in the right spot. So if it wasn't in the right spot, I could rotate the environment around. You know, like that. But it is in the right spot. You see, I'm just showing it on and off, and everything kind of lines up just the way it should be. Okay, make sure it's turned off. Now, what happens, I can rotate around, and there is that ball there. Now, if we want to preview this, let's go over to the preview, and well, where did it go? It's not here anymore. And that's why I left this script up. Because when you're working with a 3D plugin that's not native After Effects 3D, you need to refresh this. So go into the output, make sure that this is on output here, and it says refresh Skybox output. Click the button. So now that I have it refreshed, you can see how I built that environment map based on the thing that we're in. Let's go into the preview and check it out. Pretty darn cool. And you can even see right there the flare coming from the side. Not bad. So that is Skybox and how to work with 360 video. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. And I've got this Skybox Studio, so if you have any other, how do you do this, or I want to learn a very particular thing about 360 video, just go in and put a request for that. Just comment down below what you want to learn about working with 360 video. Now this is just working in After Effects, showing that you can do your normal compositing, normal editing. You just have to be a little bit tricky about it, like if you wanted to put in some text. Certain effects aren't going to work, like different blurs and sharpens because of the edges and things like that. You got to make sure that everything that you apply to it applies equally across. So I couldn't come in here and add like a gradient from top to bottom or from left to right, things like that. So that is Skybox Studio by Mettle. A lot of cool stuff you can do with it by integrating different 3D options and just standard After Effects stuff into your 360 video. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.